Here on set, and if you thought French politics and elections were over after the presidential debate, you're wrong. Elena, tell us.
Got more elections still to come. The third round, as
Hooray!
Libération puts it on their front page. Don't sound so enthusiastic, Stuart. We had, of course, 2 rounds for the presidential election, and that's why this is the third. There's actually 2 rounds of this election as well. There's a first one 3 weeks' time when thousands of candidates are going to go head-to-head over 577 constituencies over France to make up the next parliament. Then those who get more than 12.5% in that round will go and face each other off in the second round on the 17th of June. So it's the first 4 rounds. The French just cannot get enough of being called to the polls in recent weeks. Now, this is going to be a tough challenge for some of the people on this front page who are ministers who were nominated into François Hollande's new government last week. Unfortunately, they might not necessarily be in those jobs for very long, because if they lose their parliamentary seats in 4 weeks' time, they will be kicked out and he will have to reshuffle the cabinet again entirely. So Libération has been travelling around France with some of those ministers, like Aurélie Filippetti, the new culture minister, who's contesting a right-wing held constituency. There's no guarantee she's going to be able to win back for the socialists. So for people like that, and of course so that he can pass legislation, François Hollande is hoping that the victory of the left is even bigger in 4 weeks' time than it was 2 weeks ago, because he needs a strong parliamentary majority, otherwise he won't be able to get anything done. The right, of course, for their part, are really hoping for what the French call a cohabitation, this peculiarly French situation where you can get a prime minister of one political persuasion and a president of another. If there's a right-wing parliamentary majority, you could then have a right-wing prime minister who could effectively stop Hollande doing anything for the next 5 years. Now, is that really likely? Well, Libération, the left-wing paper, thinks it's not. According to their editorial, at least, the right have learnt nothing from Nicolas Sarkozy's defeat 2 weeks ago. They seem to think they can run the same campaign again and it work this time round, which seems unlikely. They're strongly blaming that right-wing line that Sarkozy took towards the end of the campaign, also for the rise of the Front National, who are hoping to get a big block of MPs in this new parliament. Le Figaro, though, the right-wing paper, is a little bit more positive. Of course, they're keeping the faith on the right. Their headline this morning says the right is mobilising itself to win those parliamentary elections. But if it's not just them that might be beset with problems in this parliamentary vote, the left also are going into it rather divided after their presidential election victory. The Huffington Post explains that they spent all of last week, the socialists, trying to reach an agreement with the Front de Gauche, which is, of course, made up of leftists and communists and those who backed Jean-Luc Mélenchon in the presidential election. They failed to reach any agreement, which means that in lots of constituencies across France, there's going to be several different candidates on the left. There's an average of 11 candidates per constituency altogether. That's an awful lot of splitting up of votes, of course, making it harder for any candidate to win a majority. They did reach an agreement with the Greens, where they're not meant to be standing candidates against one another in 60 constituencies that have supposedly been guaranteed for the Greens. But some socialists think the Greens did so badly in the presidential election, they're ignoring that and are running against the Green candidate in their own constituencies anyway. So it's all become a bit disparate. They're all sort of going in different directions on the left.
Now, one thing that might help those people on the front of Libération is François Hollande, how the boss is doing. His debut, international debut at NATO and G8.
Well, it went down pretty well. Even with Le Figaro, their front page editorial is quite positive. They say that he seems to have mastered that act of international diplomacy, which they call coming into summits, getting something out of your fellow leaders, like persuading Angela Merkel to put her name to a communique that says that growth is the most important thing for the future of the G8, and yet making everyone feel like they've got something out of it at the end of the debate. He also seems to be getting something out of Barack Obama over the Afghanistan question. He, of course, promised to pull French troops out by the end of the year, not something the US is keen on in principle, but it looks like he may be convincing Obama that they can reach a compromise where the French will keep training troops or something like that in the long term in Afghanistan. Libération, of course, the left-wing paper, are thrilled with his international performance. Hollande starts to play with the grown-ups. They headline an article in today's paper. They're very happy with his performance.
And very briefly, just quickly, the front page of one of the papers. This is something happening in Montpellier. It's to do with football, isn't it?
It is indeed. You'd probably be better to present this little bit of the show than me, but there's a very packed square here in the centre of Montpellier. 5,000 people, say Le Parisien, turned out to celebrate Montpellier's team coming top of the French league for the first time in its history. The football correspondents all across the papers say they've had a wonderful season and they thoroughly deserve it.
A lot more coming up in the sport, of course, here on France 24. Elena, thank you very much. Here's the headlines then. Hard days ahead, but no rush for the exit. The overwhelming themes as NATO leaders debate Afghanistan.